I'm going to share from Genesis 25, 29 to 34. And we've been hearing a lot about Jacob in our all-age talks. And I just want to focus this morning on Esau. What about his brother Esau? So we have Genesis chapter 25, Genesis chapter 27 and 28, and those three chapters talk about the beginning of Jacob and Esau's lives, their birth and their sort of early family life and the tensions that grow between them in those years. And then Genesis 32 and 33 talk about Jacob's wrestling with God and then his reconciliation with Esau. But when we read through these accounts, we're usually thinking about Jacob. We're thinking from his perspective and thinking about how he lied, he cheated, and he was confronted by God later in his life. And as we reflect through the New Testament, looking at these events, we see that Jacob was this wonderful example of God's grace towards us, because we're all sometimes like Jacob. And so we see how God pursues us, how God strives with us, how God lovingly confronts us rather than rejecting us in spite of our sinfulness. So we have so much we gain from seeing Jacob and what happens to him. We see that there can be love and grace and forgiveness and acceptance for us, however bad and twisted we might have been or acted. If we're willing to repent and turn back to God, that grace is there for us. But what can we learn from Esau? We don't really think about that, do we? And start to look at these accounts from his perspective. Why is it that God says in Malachi chapter 1, verses 2 to 3, and this is quoted in Romans 9, verse 13, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated? Romans 9, where it's quoted there, is talking about God's interaction with Jacob and Esau, and it's showing us that there's an example here in their lives, how God treated them, that shows us that God sovereignly decides who he's going to have mercy on. Their example illustrates to us that salvation through faith in Jesus is even more because of God's grace and not down to us, and God's choice rather than our will and our decision. That it's so much more about his will and his decision to save us. And so their life story is there, Jacob and Esau together, to show us that fact. God chose us, God chose you and me before the foundations of the earth. He chose you and me way before we were even born. That's how little it has to do with our choice. God chose us, and that's meant to give us great comfort and confidence, because, we realize how weak we are. If we mess up, it was God's choice. It's okay. He's got us. So Jacob and Esau kind of tell us sort of parallel things in that sense. But there's also lessons to be learned from his life. What do we learn about his choices that he made when we look into the narrative? Rather than this global idea about God's grace and his sovereignty, what happened in their life choices? What can we learn about the mistakes that he made and that we need to avoid in our own lives? Well, as we think about Esau's life, what he went through, I think you'll be surprised how easy it is to relate to Esau and say, yeah, okay, I get myself into situations, or I end up in situations like that. I make choices like that, or I'm tempted or pressured into situations where I might make choices like Esau did. And I'm warned here to be careful that I don't do that I don't behave like him, that I don't respond like him. So let's have a look at what the Bible tells us about Esau. That account of his life starts in Genesis 25 with his parents Isaac and Rebekah. Isaac prayed to the Lord because Rebekah, his wife, was childless, and she became pregnant. And the babies inside her, these twins, jostled, it says, with each other in the womb. And Rebekah asked God, why is this happening? And God spoke to her about it. He answered her, Genesis 25, 23 to 26. The Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. One people will become stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment, so they named him Esau. After this, his brother came out, and with his hand grasping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. So as I said, we can think about Jacob here. Oh, he's grasping the heel. But what about Esau? Well, we see Esau's origins here. We hear what he looked like. He was red all over and hairy all over. It's quite an unusual baby, right? You might be shocked if you had a baby like that, right? But there he is. He looks strange. He looks like that. But more importantly, we learn that he's going to have a nation. He's going to be successful in that sense. His family's going to survive. His family's going to thrive. And a nation will come from him. So that's good. But then we learn that that nation and he himself will be subservient to his younger brother. He's going to serve his younger brother, and his nation will be less and under his brother's nation. So that's how he's born. That's what he grows up knowing. That's what he grows up with, living under this prophetic pronouncement from God that he'll be subservient to his younger brother. And I wonder how that made him feel. I wonder how that played out in the family dynamics. Well, we see that as we read a little bit more. We're told Rebekah loved Jacob more than she loved Esau. I wonder, was that partly because of what she heard from God about the two of them? Is that why she loved Jacob more? And we read that Isaac preferred Esau. Was that because he was a man's man? You know, he was a hunter. He was like that, hunting game. Well, we're told later Isaac had a taste for the game that he brought home. He loved the meat that he brought and that he could eat, that Esau brought. But was Esau an active hunter because he wanted to prove himself? Was that because he wanted to prove he was actually stronger than Jacob after hearing this word from God that said he would serve his brother? Did he want to be stronger and prove himself against him? And Jacob was quieter. We really, he liked to stay home. Was that because he was confident in what God had said to him? Your brother's going to serve you. And God had said that. Well, of course, we don't know exactly what they were thinking, but we can imagine how they might have felt. And we can think how we might have felt if we were Esau. If we were in those circumstances, how would we have felt? How would we have responded? How would we have seen ourselves and our brother and our family? Well, it comes to a head in verses 29 to 34. Once when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country famished. He said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished." That's why he was also called Edom. Jacob replied, "First, sell me your birthright." "Look, I'm about to die," Esau said. "What good is the birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank, and then got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright. So here, Jacob really does the dirty on Esau. I don't think It's likely that any of us have been in that exact situation. If you've come home and your brother's cooked you some stew and you have to, you've been hunting. I don't think that's likely. But perhaps, it's not too difficult to think of a situation where you have been desperate and you've needed someone to help you. You've urgently needed help. And maybe at a time like that, instead of selflessly helping you, they took advantage of your situation. They saw an opportunity and used it for their own gain. Can you think of a situation where someone took advantage of you? Or can you think of a time when somebody let you down or betrayed you? Or your family? Well, Esau was in a situation where he seemed to have very little choice. He was starving, or he says he was starving. He was desperate. And so he gave up something hugely valuable for something temporary. Just one bowl of stew. I wonder if you've ever had to make a decision when you have been under extreme pressure. Stress isn't conducive to making good life decisions, is it? We shouldn't make important life decisions when we're under pressure. But that's what Esau did. And he could argue that, well, he was under pressure, he didn't have any choice, but the Bible narrative makes it very clear that he was still at fault in the way that he responded. That summary line in verse 34 really is there to underline his mistake when it said, so Esau despised his birthright. The Bible urges us to be people of integrity. And it shows us and explains to us how that integrity is tested by pressurizing situations and how under those conditions we're still expected to make the right choices and to do the right thing. We've got an amazing example of Jesus himself in the wilderness. He's fasted for 40 days and he's hungry. And then he's tempted by the devil under that intense pressure and stress, but chooses to trust in God and reject the devil's easy way out under pressure. Or James tells us in James chapter 1, verses 2-6, he says, count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith, with no doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that's driven and tossed by the wind. For that person mustn't suppose that he'll receive anything from the Lord. He's a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. These verses tell us, your faith will be tested. And it's tested when we go through various kinds of trials, difficulties, pressures, facing different situations and events which put us under pressure. And when we're under pressure, all kinds of issues rise up inside of us. A lot of negative things can come up, can't they, when you're under pressure? When you're put on the spot, you might be surprised how you respond to people in public. When they catch you by surprise and put you under pressure, or you're already stressed, and something comes out. All kind of negative and sinful things can rise up in us. Our insecurities, our frustrations, our grievances all come to the surface. And we're in danger of reacting in all kinds of negative and sinful ways. And then of justifying those responses by pointing out the pressure that we were under. Oh, I couldn't help it because of this, that, and the other. But James tells us those trials have come with a different purpose. They've come to make us stronger. They've come so that our faith can be tempered like steel. By standing firm, not giving into temptation when we're under pressure, we become steadfast. And by remaining steadfast under those pressures, we're made perfect and complete and will lack nothing in our faith. There'll be a sense of completeness, a sense of wholeness in our relationship with God. And that's how we get to that place, through trials, through pressures, and making the right choices under those conditions. But we've got a choice that we need to make. And it's the choice to embrace those trials, embrace those pressures and stresses as a positive thing, to see them for what they are, for what God says they are, and to respond with faith to them. Otherwise, we shortcut the process. If we say, no, I'm just going to get out of this, I'm going to react badly, or I'm going to run away from it, James says stay under it. Let it have its complete work. Let it do its work in you as you respond the right way. We understand Esau, I think, because we can look at his life and say, you know what, he was under extreme pressure. We can sympathize with him, perhaps even empathize with him, but we can't agree with him. We could maybe listen to him telling us about, this is what happened, this is what was going on in my life, and, I was so hungry, I thought I was going to die, and so I sold my birthright to my brother. And we can tell him, I'm really sorry for what pressure you were under. That's just terrible. I understand why you did it. But we can't say that he was right. We have to say, but you were still wrong to make that decision, to make that choice. He was suffering and he faced a terrible dilemma. But in that trial, he made the wrong choice. He did the wrong thing. See, James also reminds us that if we're in a situation like that, we can call on God's help in that time of need. We have a resource in him. It says we can ask him for wisdom. And if we trust him, if we have faith when we ask, he will help us. He will willingly and generously, says God generously will give wisdom to us, the wisdom that we need to make the right choice, to make the right decisions. Esau's problem was he didn't act with faith. That was the root of his problem. Romans 14:23 says, everything that doesn't come from faith is sin. See, when we live without any reference to God, we automatically live a sinful life. We can't discern right from wrong. We can't figure out what God's will is. We're at the mercy of our base nature. Our desires, our emotions, our feelings are in charge. And they lead us astray. If Esau had been acknowledging and honoring God, he would never have despised his birthright. Hebrews 12:16 says, he was godless. He was godless. And that godlessness is what we see then unfolding in his life as time goes on. When he lost his father's blessing, he didn't humble himself before God. He arrogantly stormed off and married foreign wives who were following foreign gods. And he did it to deliberately upset his parents. That's the temptation that all of us face when we have been betrayed or when we've been hurt. Any time that we feel that life's been unfair to us, we face the temptation to rebel against God and to make other people suffer because we're hurting. Even if that means making bad choices that will also affect us badly. That's the danger time. That's when we need to dig deep and hold on to and persevere in our faith and press into our relationship with God. When we're under pressure and under attack, we need to turn towards God, not away from him. We need the armor of God. We need to guard our thoughts with the knowledge of our salvation, reminding ourselves we're loved, we're accepted, we're forgiven, we're held, we're blessed by God for all eternity. Even if we're not the favorite son, even if we're not getting the biggest slice of the cake, as it were, even if we're not getting all the attention that someone else is getting, even if we're not receiving all of the blessings all at the time, even if we see someone else getting away with their evil schemings and that's affecting us, we need to recognize our own strong position, unassailable position in the Lord, lifting up the shield of faith in order to quench all the burning arrows of the evil one, putting truth around our waist, surrounding ourselves with God's truth, and hearing Him say over and over again, "Don't be afraid, for I am with you." Isn't that a memory verse? Don't be afraid, because I am with you. We need to know it, don't we? We need to proclaim it. We need to hold on to it. We need to surround ourselves with that truth. That's there to protect us from other thoughts, other reactions, other responses when we're under pressure. The Word of God is the spiritual sword that the Lord gives us, a sword of the Spirit, so we can defend and attack the enemy at the same time. We need to hold firmly to the Word of God, that sword, and step up and fight like a warrior, not shrink back and give ground to the enemy. If you don't think you're in a fight, you're going to lose the fight, right? Esau wanted to kill his brother because of what he'd done to him. You might well feel the same about someone in your life. But we have to fight back with spiritual weapons, not carnal ones. We have to step up to fight in the shoes of peace. We're ambassadors of Christ, agents of reconciliation. We're led by the Prince of Peace. We're at war with the principalities and powers, the evil forces in the heavenly realms. We're not fighting against flesh and blood. To fight that way, we've first got to get ourselves right with God, don't we? We need to orientate our hearts. We need to orientate our minds. We need to orientate our will to get them lined up with God's word and lined up with God's will. We need to humble ourselves before God to surrender everything to Him if we want to be victorious. If you're stressed, if someone winds you up even more, you can't respond in a faith-filled, godly way unless you're drawing on the mighty strength and power of God. That is the spiritual battle. Well, I'm sure many, if not all of you, heard about the flight that took place between London and Singapore at the end of May. It was flight SQ321 that suffered terrible turbulence. It dropped tens of feet in a few seconds, and people were thrown out of their seats. Those who weren't wearing seatbelts were thrown around the cabin and severely injured. In fact, one British man died, and over 40 people were treated in hospital from their injuries. Over half of them, or about half of them, were in intensive care. And among those in hospital were 6 skull and brain injuries. I mean, it was pretty horrific, and 13 muscular and soft tissue conditions, and there were a lot of spine and spinal cord injuries. It was very serious. When you're on a plane, so you're urged to wear your seatbelt. And if the cabin loses pressure, you're urged to put on your oxygen mask before you try and help anybody else. And it's the same principle if you want to help someone when they're drowning. There are procedures you have to follow to ensure your own buoyancy and safety if you want to successfully save somebody else, if you want to save their life. And there's a spiritual principle here. We have to have the seatbelt of truth firmly fastened around our waists. We have to be breathing the pure oxygenated air of heaven if we're going to navigate this turbulent world successfully, if we want to avoid serious spiritual injuries like those Esau suffered. And if we want to help other people get free from sin and find freedom and life in Jesus, we've got to be right with God ourselves, don't we? Galatians 6:1-5 says, brothers and sisters, if someone's caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. But watch yourselves, or you may also be tempted. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. If anyone thinks they're something when they're not, they deceive themselves. Each one should test their own actions. Then they can take pride in themselves alone without comparing themselves to someone else, for each one should carry their own load. As you're helping other people, as you're walking by the Spirit, you can help other people. But as you're helping other people, continue to watch yourself. Watch your relationship with God and what's going on in that. Make sure that you're not tempted. And one temptation really hinted at here in these verses is the temptation of pride. Thinking we're something when we're not, and deceiving ourselves, forgetting that, well, I was just saved by grace. Thinking that, as I help this person, maybe I'm a bit better than they are. Restore people gently. It says not comparing yourself to anybody else. Not thinking you're any better than anybody else. Esau couldn't even help himself, let alone help anybody else. But you and I are called to find our strength, our peace, our confidence in God, our resources in Him, so that for ourselves, so that when we're facing trials of various kinds, we can also help others who are struggling as well, not just ourselves. Our faith is meant to bring us into an abundant spiritual life where we experience the peace of God, the power of God, the knowledge of the love of God, where that love is then expressed through our lives to other people, where we can lift them up through our words and our actions. This is so much further away than Esau's condition. I'm a victim, I'm under pressure, I'm making bad choices, and I'm in a mess. We're called to receive the power of God in those situations, to fight against those temptations, to get through them successfully, to stand up strong, and then to be useful to other people. Galatians 5:6 says the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love. Faith expressing itself through love. And Esau is an example of the opposite of that, isn't he? He had unbelief, which then led to hatred and resentment, not faith expressed in love. Unbelief expressed in hatred and resentment. When Paul's writing to Timothy, he's trying to encourage this young guy. He tells him there's things you've got to avoid in the Christian life. There's things you've got to reject. You can't just coast through and just go, well, whatever happens, happens. You've got to be alert and active as a Christian. And you've got to throw some things away. And you've got to embrace some other things, and you've got to hold on tightly to them, and you've got to focus on them, and you've got to go for it with those things. That's what he's telling them. Telling Timothy, saying it's no good drifting through life. You can think of a boat like a ship with no rudder. It's just at the mercy of the ocean. It's going to go wherever the tide leads it. It's going to go wherever the storms push it. What Timothy's been told by Paul is, as he writes encouraging him, it's like, I want you to put up the sail, and I want you to catch the wind of the Spirit. I want you to go where God's leading you. I want you to hold tight to the rudder. And I want you to aim it in the direction. Fix your eyes on a point on the horizon that you're meant to face and go that direction. But you've got to actively lead that boat. That's what he wrote to him, 2 Timothy 2:22-26. I'm going to end with this. Flee the evil desires of youth and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace, along with those who call on the Lord out of a pure heart. Don't have anything to do with foolish and stupid arguments, because you know they produce quarrels. And the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but must be kind to everyone, able to teach, not resentful. So you and I are meant to be free of some things so that we can share the love of God with others. Not get caught up in any stupid arguments. There's so many stupid arguments around in the world today, right? Meant to not get caught up in them. We're meant to resist all evil desires. It talks about evil desires of youth. We're meant to resist knee-jerk reactions and faithless choices. Resist them. Don't go down that path. Say no to them. And we're meant to pursue something. Pursue righteousness. Pursue faith. Pursue love. Pursue peace with a clear conscience and a pure heart. So when you think about Esau, think about that. What attitudes and habits and temptations do you share with Esau when you're under pressure? What is it you need to reject when those times come, when you're in those situations? What do you need to say no to? I'm not going down that route. I'm rejecting that. I'm throwing that off. But this is what I'm going to aim for. This is what I'm going to hold on to, so that you can freely pursue Jesus and walk victoriously with him, and not only help yourself, but help a whole load of other people too.